Welcome to Navigate Now. This is the podcast where we explore the relationships between us and that space around us.
So let's get started. I'm Sandhya Seshan.
And I'm Jonathan Doxey.
And we are your hosts. Our topic for this episode is heads-up mapping.
So just to kick off, let's start thinking about, there's a lot of detail we need to consider when we talk about heads-up mapping. But I just want to take a step back before we start talking about that area of mapping, just to give ourselves a bit of a context of the importance of mapping and the importance of mapping within a wayfinding system. When I think about a map, I was just to take a little step back further, is I would always say if there's one thing that we need in a wayfinding system, it's a map. Why? What does that map do? That map tells us a couple of things. It tells us where I am, with the UI here, or a blue dot if you're in a digital environment, but it also gives me that context of what's around me. And there's a whole tapestry that we can put onto a map to help people know where they are and find themselves in that built environment.
I think also when we're talking about maps, we obviously have the directions that we get verbally, and then adding that one extra element of a visual entity also helps in the overall finding your way process.
We spoke in other episodes, haven't we, around kind of landmarks,
Yeah.
and how we use those in the physical environment. And the map, what does that do? It takes us and gives us that experience of understanding that environment on a piece of paper, on a screen, on a sign, etc., etc. We can learn about something that's just the other side of the building, which we wouldn't see in the physical space,
Yeah.
but we can know about that in the map.
Yeah, and also I think before we get to a space, let's say if you look at Google Maps, before we actually reach a space, it's kind of like pre-visit information.
Yeah.
If you look at the map and then you see a landmark A on one side, so you know you're on the other side of the landmark, the other side of the river, on the left or on the right. So I think that also helps in kind of understanding your environment even before you get to it at some points.
Yeah, that's a key thing, because we talk a lot about pre-visit information, specifically when we're looking at hospitals, but you can start to learn that space. I attempt to play a little bit of golf. You often use the map on that golf course to predict what you're going to do in the future. So it's really important to have that map, and we can have data around that, just to take that golf environment again, and we'll pick up in a little bit maybe. But we can put a level of data onto that map, of rich information, so I can understand what's coming up in front of me.
Yeah.
There's a lot of history, isn't there, around maps as well? Kind of, if we're using the kind of the professional terminology, we talk about cartography, and the science and the process of developing a map, and we can look back through history, and we can see how things have changed through the use of maps. Or just take in London, for example, the underground system, the London Underground or the Tube network. If we looked at the very first map designed by Harry Beck, another thing to look at if you're looking into the history of mapping and information graphics and information design and wayfinding, but look at the very first map of how he took away from a geographic environment and took it into a linear environment, and then how the tube lines have been added, developed, and now we've got the river in the map. That was a whole controversy. All different situations can be seen as we look back in history of mapping and an exploration of how the world has been unpicked and understood through the use of good mapping.
Yeah, like as you said, I think there are a range of maps and mapping styles, from giving a lot of information and making it more artistic to going through the graphic route and having it very simplified. And I think that's where we are at now, at present, where it's a lot more graphic, where you just have the information that you currently need and making it as simple as possible so it's accessible by everyone.
I think we could talk for a lot longer about kind of the history of mapping and the illustrative and the history and the culture aspect of it, the materials that have been used to create those maps. But I guess that kind of lets us think about the flexibility of a map. How can a map be flexible? Coming back into kind of a wayfinding solution environment, a map can, for example, in the digital space, it can show us what's the destinations for the time of the day, or it can then show us the destinations for the night time. It could be a running map, it could be a walking map, it could be a historic trail, it could be a kids map. It can be flexible to the situation, the environment, the user type that needs that particular information to be presented to them. Events, different users, different needs. I think it's a really good resource that can have that flexibility around it.
I think what you mentioned right there is very key in the aspect of flexibility, where we have growing population, and so we have the built environment, but we can't go on building, and we try to make optimum use of what we have. And so that's why this flexible kind of multi-purpose spaces come into being, where in the morning it might be community center, in the evening there'll be classes going on, and then there might be theater workshops, etc., etc. And so that whole flexibility, if when it comes into maps, kind of gives a lot more clarity as to different like target groups that come into that space. Someone coming in the morning might be looking for something that might not be available in the evenings, and so that's where this flexibility, I think, is very key.
I think you take that into the retail environment, where you've got shops, and they may be changing, not too regularly hopefully, but on an infrequent basis, whereby that flexibility, you can have their brands, their names on that mapping, so you can, when you go through the shopping centre, you can then know exactly where, but if something needs to change, it can change, and the map is adaptable to that. Or maybe like in the medical scene, the hospitals, wards change. In an emergency environment, in not necessarily just in hospitals, but in other situations, so take airports, take other destinations, that map can be flexible to respond to the need that is at hand. I think there's some really important things there, aren't there? Then we can unpick them a lot further, but adaptability, I think, is really key.
Yes, changing environment, I think warrants a changing flexible design that goes hand in hand with all of the changes that's happening around us.
So I guess that's a bit easier in the digital space. Where you've got screens and you don't have to print stuff and other manufacturing techniques, etc., etc. So I guess the digital environment, that's really key. And I guess exciting things coming into play these days is the use of new technology. So AR, or augmented reality. How can we use mapping and wayfinding devices, layered that, we talked about interchangeability of information, and we're effectively doing the same kind of thing using AR as a layer on not a map per se, but on the built environment, the environment around us. We put that level of data, that level of information onto your environment through the use of AR. And I guess it's got that map element to it as well, which is really exciting, and how that technology can be used, but also personalised. We talked about maps being, say, for like a historic trail or a kids map, and that's for a subset of a user group. But the utilisation of AR makes it yours. Makes it mine. So we can then create that great experience for every individual in their own needs and ways, etc., etc.
And adding those extra layers of dimension to a 2D map makes it all the more easy and accessible.
100%.
I think that's the way we're going currently in the future.
So I guess that's just really kind of a very high level introduction into some of the key aspects of maps. Obviously this episode we talk about heads up maps. So we need to unpick that with what that means, what that's about, why we would do that, what the benefits of it are. So it's important. So what then, when we talk about heads up map, heads up mapping, heads up maps, what are we actually meaning? So it's a map which orientates itself to the user's view. We've all been in an environment where we've got a printed map and we've got that out and we've rotated it and we've kind of done all of this to a printed map, or we've seen a map on a wall, say in a car park, and we've just parked, we've just got off the bus, and it tells us, well, hopefully it should tell us where we are, because we said that's one of the key things a map should tell us, tells where we are and what's around us. But the building might be at the top of the map, but actually behind, so it's kind of just the orientation, the cognitive process that our brain goes through for navigation is getting a little bit confused. As a result of those aspects, I think a map for me would be the most important part of any wayfinding solution. So we've talked about the general aspects of mapping in a very brief and high level way, but this episode is all about heads-up mapping. So what do we mean when we mean heads-up mapping? There's a couple of things that we want to just cover and highlight. There's the key aspects of what we mean when we mean heads-up mapping. Essentially, that map orientates itself or is orientated to the environment where you are. So think about this. So you're in, say, by a bus stop, and the bus stop is in front of you. On the map, that is so. As I turn around, the bus stop is behind me. So the map has then flipped, it's rotated, it's orientated itself to that environment now that the bus stop is behind me. We are even more used to this over since the age of the smartphone, Google Maps and Apple Maps, etc., etc. Because we used to have that blue dot. We mentioned maps are all about knowing that we're where we are, that we're here, but also when we rotate, the map rotates with our phone. So that's a really key aspect of what we can bring an example of how we've all kind of come across heads-up mapping in our views.
Also, I think when we've gotten so accustomed to our Google Maps, the physical maps that we come across in the space should also be able to help us in the same way, because we are so used to our Google Maps. And so we kind of also need that brought into our physical environment as well.
It's an expectation, isn't it? It's a raising of the bar, the raising of the standard, but it's just making it intuitive.
Yeah.
It's just making that environment easy to navigate around, easy to find where I need to go, and it just makes it's clear.
Yeah.
And yes, our podcast is Navigate Now, but our brand name is Claro, and that means clarity. And that's what wayfinding should be. It should be really clear and really obvious about where I am and where I'm going to get to. So what else does that map do? That map aligns with the surrounding environment. So we talked about the orientation of the map, but those elements of how I'm getting from A to B and those aspects to the environment around me are relevant there as well. And it's really important to have those clearly marked on that map. So that river is on the left, but if I flip round, the river's on the right, etc., etc. It's really important to get that consistency of visual language and visual style in that particular element of the map. And we talked about making an area clear and obvious, claro, consistency, legibility, ease of use, etc., etc. And that's essentially what heads-up mapping is all about. Yes, it's a design precedent, or you might say a wayfinding based practice, but put that to one side for a moment. It's all about the user.
Yeah.
Wayfinding is all about the user and their journey, and how we can make their journey as easy and as intuitive as possible. We talked about the different types of maps that could be used, like heritage, kids events, etc., etc. And it's all the drive of the user.
Yeah.
To make sure they can find exactly where they need to get to in the most easy and seamless way possible.
It's almost like wayfinding acts kind of like a bridge between the environment and the user, and we can't change much of the environment. It's already there. It's massive.
Yeah.
So what we can do is, and we can't change the user, but we can facilitate the user to navigate it better. And I think that's where this bridge comes into play.
We are we're giving resources, aren't we?
Yeah. We're
giving them resources to be able to complete the journey in the way and the environment and the type of user that they are and they have. Also, you mentioned digital, and it goes without saying, doesn't it, that heads-up mapping comes not necessarily comes out of, but is solidified and confirmed by the use of digital. But digital for personal devices. So your iPhone, your Android phone, Samsung, whatever phone you have, and that your smartphone is your personal navigation device. So we can use that in a heads up way. And that map doesn't just give us that orientation, it gives us so much more data around routing, personal guidance, turn-by-turn directions, etc., etc. And I guess heads-up mapping is relevant to lots of environments. There's some tools in the wayfinding toolkit that we often talk about that are specifically or primarily for one particular environment. But heads-up mapping works across the board. Whether we're in a town centre, industrial estate, the outside of a hospital, shopping centre, stadium, all those types of environments, heads-up mapping pervades. And I guess that's why we call it one of the key aspects of wayfinding best practice.
Yeah.
Because like we were saying when we talk about kind of Apple Maps, Google Maps, etc., they've got this standard, effectively, of how the user expects to know their personal navigation experience. And if we can, together as an industry, together as practitioners and place management professionals, if we can take that level up, so we've got that consistent language throughout all our elements of the built environment, that will just help the users when they're going across sites as well.
Yeah, I think essentially wayfinding comes into play as soon as you step out of your house, because as soon as you step out, you're trying to go from point A to point B, and it might be a corridor inside your apartment to the train station, inside the building that is your destination, to try and find a place, specific place. It could be a room, a conference room inside the building, or it could be the park that you're going for your walk in, a new park that you're trying to explore. So I think wayfinding comes into play as soon as you step out from your own space.
100%. And there's an element of pre-visit as well that we often talk about, isn't there? We've maybe touched that in another episode. Pre-visit information is really key. And mapping, like we said in the early part of our episode just now, it's about that environment and how we can learn about that space before we visited that space.
And as we're talking about how we spend so much time outside, it is very key that we make that experience as pleasant as possible. And that's why heads-up mapping is key. So to touch up on why we should do heads-up mapping, the first and foremost reason would be to reduce the cognitive load on one person. So what is cognitive load? If we are in a space and if we feel disoriented, we do not feel that great.
We're not comfortable.
Yeah. And comfort is the most, I think, important aspect of our well-being, and that's what we seek. And so if we are in a location, or if you are in an external or internal environment, the first thing that we would want to seek is comfort. Yes, new environments can be stressful, but how much can we reduce that stress? And if I am standing in front of a bus stop and I'm late for a meeting, I do not want to be standing and trying to rotate a map in my head. I have a meeting in 5 minutes. The building might just be 2 minutes away, but I spend 3 to 5 minutes trying to rotate the map standing at the bus stop. But if we give prominent, effective information, which is already heads-up map with landmarks and all of those key aspects that we spoke about, I think that significantly reduces the stress that is involved in trying to find one's way, also making it a lot more accessible and a lot more user-friendly.
Yes, we don't need to do that. We're just cutting out all that cognitive activity that our mind is trying to process, and we're just making it just clear and obvious. We're just making that decision process seamless and a lot more consistent.
And also, the heads-up map will kind of take into account the way we naturally try to navigate an environment, so making it a lot more intuitive. And so, taking into account all of the landmarks nearby, you then create a seamless journey and a seamless experience.
And that's really important, isn't it? Because like take a new environment, having that great first experience, or even just discovering new things, is going to be really facilitated by that map and that taking that aspect of it to be heads up as well.
And wayfinding, we spoke about how it's a bridge between people and the place, and the first element that comes into mind would be a map. And a heads up map does it perfectly because it takes into account the context you're in and and the context is taken into account in such a way that it is specific to each point. If you're in point A in your journey, the context is different from when you're in point B of the same journey. 5 meters away and your context changes, and that's what the heads up map takes into account, which is great because you get the specific information that you need at that specific point and nothing else. So there's no more extra information to cause confusion.
You could be around a bend, around a corner, across the bridge, under an underpass. You could have the environment has changed, can change. Specifically, say in the cityscape, the environment can change quite dramatically, can't it?
Yeah.
So it's important to make sure that that's right for that context, for that situation, for that position you are within that space, and then it adapts
Yeah.
as you move through that environment. That's key.
Also, a lot of learning is done very subconsciously. So when you're navigating an environment and you have all of these kind of negative factors like stress that is impeding your wayfinding performance. So if you try and eliminate all of that, then it kind of facilitates in trying to find your way better. So when that stress is taken out from the equation, you might even remember the route much more clearly. And so the next time you visit the same environment or a similar environment, you are able to find your way a lot more quicker. So this heads up map also helps you to learn your environment better and visualize it a lot better and make you more susceptible to any small change in the environment that you can further easily
100%. And like when we're managing spaces, people flow and navigation is really important.
Yeah.
So if we are getting people going to a map and then stopping there for multiple minutes, say 3-4 minutes, trying to digest that information, they're not going to continue their journey. And you potentially can get a backlog of people then using that ready, waiting to use that navigation device, that wayfinding part of the toolkit. But if people are using it in an intuitive way, we can just see the flow of, say, people coming off a train, people coming into an airport, etc., or whatever environment the principle pervades the situation. But the flow of people, say, in an emergency situation, say coming out of a high footfall area, say like a stadium where you've got 50,000 people maybe coming out at once, if they're all stopping and looking at a map, because it's not intuitive, because it's not heads up, we get a backlog. We could get a safety issue, we could get a people flow issue. But if the wayfinding system with the map as a facilitation of that, just that flow can be a lot more consistent.
Yeah, I think that's why wayfinding is so very important on a day-to-day basis, because from our planes we have our which way to go in case of an emergency, to our concerts or anywhere there's a lot of footfall. The first thing that we are educated about is which way to exit in case of an emergency.
Yeah.
And that is in high stress situations, but that also plays a big part in terms of our day-to-day lifestyle, from going from point A to point B, which is why I think heads up map overall makes our experience and our journey much more pleasant and much more enjoyable.
So we've touched a little bit on maps generally. We've dug deep into kind of the principles and the benefits of that heads up map. So then maybe let's just have a little think and just consider how we then go about creating that heads up map. Obviously, from the very outset, we need that base data.
Yeah.
So we can use GIS data, we can use open source data to be able to get the information to be able to then create that base map. We need to have that base map to be able to then go and create all the elements of that. But when we, in the head ups of this episode, we start talking about kind of how maps can be flexible to the environment, to the situation. Designing a map uniquely for each location, I think, is really important, because we don't want to take one map style and then use it for every town, every shopping centre, every situation, because they're all unique. They all have their own story, etc., etc. So we take that base data and that map data, GIS or OpenStreetMap, or if it's a particular city, they might have their own level layer of mapping already created. And then what's the key aspect of heads up? It's orientation, right?
Yeah.
So it's important that we then orientate that map to the exact location of the exact sign where is exactly going to get installed.
Yeah.
So we've got to think about a whole element of practical situations to say, can that pedestrian monolith, can that map sign go in that location? Are there services in the way? Is there other things that could impede that opportunity for that particular location?
I think that is very key, because if there are 5 exits for a shopping center and all 5 exits have the same map, all oriented in the same direction, that is not going to help much, because then you're trying to find your way. Whereas I think the 5 exits with 5 different maps, all in the exact orientation of that exit from the direction in which you're looking at the sign, I think that will considerably help.
Definitely.
In terms of...
And that orientation aligns that map to the view
Yeah.
of that particular person in that particular location. And there's obviously the elements of the mapping that we show landmarks, we show those key destinations that are in the facility. We haven't talked about scale as much. We could cover that in a separate episode potentially. The sense of scale that needs to be created on that map. So we talked about that situation where you might be at the bus stop, you might spend a little bit too long, you might have a 2-minute journey, you might have 5 minutes, but you've wasted 4 of that, orientating that map in your mind. We need to show a sense of scale and a sense of direction on that particular map as well, because then that can give me some wider context of how I then take my further journey within that particular environment. We talked about clutter, didn't we?
Yeah.
It's important for a map to tell me what I need to know. In a sense, nothing more, nothing less. And that's the art of great design. That's the art of infographics and information design, is to tell me exactly what I need to know. And then the rest of the information, or what you can even highlight that further, tell me what I need to know now.
Yeah.
Then what I need to know later, give it to me then. Don't bombard me with all the information, like, I don't know, say you're baking a cake, you don't want to know all the steps right from the start. You need to know a little bit of context maybe, of where you're headed, but you need to know step by step by step, and that's what we can achieve when we help people in the heads-up mapping, because they're going to move through that environment, and that mapping is going to respond to that journey.
I think when you start off, all you need to know is what you need to do at the starting point.
Yeah.
As we're talking about making a cake, we first need to know what ingredients we need. There's no point of knowing what the 10th step is, maybe putting the cake in the oven. If that was the first information that was given, then that does not help in the whole process.
Yeah.
So I think what information that we give, as you said, at what point, which is why unique maps at every place is very, very key.
They're unique, but they're consistent.
Yeah.
Because we have that same base layer, we have that same base map and the principles, the design language, that's consistent. So we're not re-educating people all the time. You can often see it when you go from one environment to another. Say you're in the built environment, say in a public environment, you go from, say, one local authority to another, or one venue to another. Their design language will change.
Yeah.
Potentially. So we're keeping that same design language, but the mapping is flexible to the environment and the journey that you're going to be on, because that's great for legibility. It's important that we have those elements. And I think we talked about digital, we talked about physical signs on the street and in the environment in that sense. So I think it's important that, what does the map do? The map is the glue.
Yeah.
We talk about wayfinding being the bridge between journey and place in that sense, but a map is the glue that connects all the interventions, all the touch points of that particular solution, strategy, etc., etc. That wayfinding system is connected with that particular map.
I think we also come into using maps from a very early age, and as kids we are a lot more visually enticed. We look at things more visually, and then even when someone is trying to explain the way to us, they would first tell us take a left and then a right and then left, and if you say you don't understand, the first thing you do is grab a piece of paper and then you draw, and then take a left, and then immediately it's a lot more easier to understand, and it's a lot more effectively grasped, and you remember it.
Yeah.
So I think that's why maps are key, and heads-up maps are even more key.
Even talking about the development of a young person in that sense, maps are always given as a challenge. Send someone out onto so there's something called the Duke of Edinburgh, where you'll get sent out maybe for a day or maybe overnight, and you're given a map.
Yeah.
You're given landmarks, and you've got to orientate yourself. It's part of growing up, I guess.
Yeah.
It's part of
treasure hunts.
Yeah, treasure hunts. That's not Easter egg hunts. All
Easter
those
egg
kind,
hunts,
all those
yeah.
kind of things, and we're given landmarks.
Yeah.
We're given cues, and it's part of that discovery, isn't it? We're talking about destination discovery.
Yeah.
That's the fun part of it. So there's loads we can think about when we think about the principles of map design and cartography. How we can then make sure that that map is relevant to the environment, specifically thinking about that heads up area, and then the process, because there's a lot more in it than a map that's used the same map in every location within that environment.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit more to consider when you're designing maps to be heads up. So that's the thing that we can cover in other episodes. So I think this has been a really good conversation about learning mapping, heads up mapping, and how we can best use that within that particular environment. So it's just left for me to say thanks for joining us on this episode of Navigate Now.
We are your host, Sandhya Seshan
And Jonathan Doxey.
And we're thrilled to have you on this journey of continuous learning and exploration.
So just stay tuned for upcoming episodes where we're going to continue that conversation about understanding about people and place.
So don't forget to like, share and subscribe and join our growing community of listeners. Thank you.